So let's now move on to the most important concept in Python and in any other programming language, which are functions. So functions are basically, let me just give you an example of a real life example of a function. So let's suppose you have a grinder and you take some ingredients and you now put some ingredients into the grinder, and then you run the grinder, and then the grinder will give you a mixture of that. That means that grinder acts like a function. So if you will give input to the function, it is more likely to give you an output. So in Python programming or in any other programming language, when you create function, you will pass some arguments or some variables or constants to this functions, and this function will do some operation and it will give you some output. So let's write our some inbuilt functions. Inbuilt functions are those functions which are already provided in the Python package. So they are already implemented. What you just need to do is you will have to pass it you will have to pass some values to these inbuilt functions. So let's discuss about type conversion using the inbuilt functions. So there is a function, predefined function int. So a function is preceded by these circular parentheses, and let's convert a string into integer. So you can see that 12 is a string, and now I'm going to print this value like this. So int is basically a inbuilt function, and type conversion is basically converting one type into another. In this case, we are converting the string value into integer value. So you see that in the output it is showing 12, right? So what now I'm just going to do is I will print the float value of 4 and show 0.0. So it actually converts an integer into a float value, right? So let's convert an integer into a string. So let's suppose the integer is 56. Hit Control Enter, and you can see that 56 is shown here as a string, right? So now what we're just going to do is you will have to make sure that type conversion is valid, because if you will not be able to convert it into integer. So let me give you an example of it. Function, and inside you are giving a string like hello. So this is invalid because you cannot convert a hello string into an integer, right? Hello is a string and it will remain a string. 12 can be converted into an integer. So when you will run this program, you will see and this which says value error invalid literal for int with base 10 hello. You cannot write it like this. So let's print it out and say that this is invalid. So now let's move on to the inbuilt math functions. So there is a library in Python. Let me import this library, and when you import a library, let me import the math library. Whenever you will import a library, you will be able to use the functions that have already been defined in this library. So we are going to use the math library to define some math functions which provide some useful mathematical functions, right? So let's print the square root of a number, square root of 4, using math.sqrt function, which is an inbuilt function which is used to calculate the square root of the number which is given inside this. So math functions are really useful in data science also, and let's now print some more values, like the value of pi can be printed like this. You can even print the log of some number, like let of 10.0. So let me run this program and you can see the output here. Square root of 4 is 2. This is the value of pi, and log of 10.0 is this. So how you can use the inbuilt functions. So let's now cover the user defined functions. So user defined functions are the functions that you are going to define. So you're going to implement that whole function, you will pass the inputs to it, and you will have to handle the function so that it will be able to give you a certain output. So in order to create a function, you will have to use def reserved keyword. So this is a reserved keyword. You cannot use this keyword for creating variables. So let's create a function, a very simple function, display function. And it's not necessary that a function will take some arguments or some inputs. So whenever a particular function takes some input, we are going to write it within these circular parentheses, which we will see in a later bit. And when you will press enter, you will be able to see that it leaves some space, and this space is known as indentation, which is very important in Python programming. So you can see here there are no curly braces. So a block or a block of statements are defined using these spaces. So if you will write these same number of spaces, it means that it is a single block of statement under this function display. Right, so let's print display function is called. Right, so if you will now you can see that I have created a function display which takes no output, but it will print this whole string in the output screen. So once you have created a function, what you just need to do is this function will not run until and unless you will make a call to it. Now we are going to make a function call. So let's call this display function, and since we are not giving any inputs, we are going to leave the parentheses like this. So let's press hit enter. So you can see that display function is called. So this is a simple display function. So let's write another function, of a useful function which is used to print out the square of a number. So since we will have to give input to this function, we will specify it in the parentheses. So this is the parameter input a, and let's create another variable which will hold the square of this number, the input. Then press enter. Remember, the space should be the same because this is the same function. So now we are going to return the value of c. So when you will call this function square root, you will specify an input, and when you will specify an input and call this function, it will return this value c, which is the square of the function. Is a keyword, and it is used for two purposes. One is to break out of the loop, which we will see in the flow control topic later on, but here return is used to return some value whenever this function is called. So what I am going to do is I am going to make a call to this function, which is the sqr function, and let's provide it some random value 4. Right, so since it will return the value c, we will print that value in here. So let's run this program, and you can see that 16 is displayed. So this is how user can define own function, provide some inputs to it, and perform some operations, and can also return some values from the function. So I am going to write here return values. Right, and I'm going to write here we have some operations, right? So this is how you are going to make a function call. So let's now try to print the value of c outside this function. So this is the square function, and these are the block of statements inside this square function, and it is specified using the same number of space here. So one thing you will have to notice here is that the c variable is defined inside this function, and if you will try to print it outside this function, it will give you an error. So it will give you an error that the name c is not defined, because it is defined only in the function. So this is known as the scope rules. So this variable c has a scope rule, and it is defined in function square, so you cannot just print it here. So I will write here that this will give you a name error, print c, like this. So this whole program, whenever you will run this whole program, there is a function which is a main function. You don't need to define this main function because it is already there in the top of the stack. So the topmost function is the main function, and it looks like this: 2 underscores main and 2 underscores.